next to Prime Minister. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all in Tallinn, and specifically at the public discussion titled Troublesome Waters in European Security. The event is jointly organized by the Estonian Government Office and the Lennart Meri Conference here in Estonia. We're going to go speak about the developments in European security, and I'm honored to have on the stage with me the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of Norway, Mr. Jonas Gahr Støre, and the Prime Minister of Estonia, Mr. Kristen Michal. Thank you all for being here. And I'm Helga Kalm, I'm the director of the Lennart Meri Conference, and I'll be moderating this discussion. The war in Ukraine has shook the foundations of European security, and we're feeling the impact every day. But the question is, how long will these impacts last? So far, NATO countries have done a lot to support Ukraine, and CHEF countries in particular stand out here. Together, all the CHEF countries spend more than all the other European members of NATO. The remaining 18 then, and the 10, we spend more. But Russia also receives help from its allies, namely China, Iran, and North Korea. And most importantly, North Korea is supporting the war by sending troops to Ukraine. But the war is larger than just what happens in Ukraine. We've seen an increase in hybrid attacks in the Baltic Sea region in particular. We've all read about the cables that keep being broken. But also we've received migrants on our borders and so on. The NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has said that Russia might test NATO in 4 to 5 years, but some, in particular in Estonia, argue that it might be even sooner. So, Prime Minister Starmer, what is the security situation in Europe, and what more can we do to be better prepared for all sorts of eventualities?
Well, thank you. And can I just say thank you to Estonia, the Prime Minister of Estonia, for setting up this event for us this evening. I don't think we've had one of these at a JEF event before, so it's really good to have the opportunity to discuss these issues in public. This is my 5th time in Estonia, so I'm beginning to understand and really appreciate everything that we have here. I came twice when I was a chief prosecutor working on criminal justice issues, and I came twice as leader of the opposition back in the UK to visit our troops in Tallinn. And now this is my first trip as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So it's really good to be here again with such a fantastic panel, if I may say so. On this question of security in Europe, the starting point for me is that I think we live in an ever more volatile world. I don't think many of us can remember a period quite as volatile as this, with conflict going on in various different seats across the world. And I have to say, when the Berlin Wall came down, I remember that profoundly as a young man. And I didn't think that we would see Russian tanks rolling across a border in Europe again in my lifetime. I thought that we'd turned a much bigger corner in the world than we evidently had. But here we are in a very difficult situation. We're now past the 1000th day of the conflict in Ukraine. And it's at a very pivotal moment, and therefore this is a good discussion to be having right now. The first thing I should say, because people often ask, well, surely the conflict should end? And my first answer to that is yes, of course. And the quickest and easiest way for it to end is for the aggressor to pull back, Russia to pull back. And we must always start in that place when we're talking about the resolution or what might happen next in Ukraine, because we have an aggressor and we have Ukraine that's been fighting for sovereignty and their way of life for a very, very long time now in this conflict. Clearly, as we go into 2025, there's a live debate now about what happens next. Russia has obviously got the capability to backfill its military capability in the offensive. It has little regard to life on its own side. Hundreds of thousands dead and injured on the Russian side, without regard really from Russia to the cost, the human cost to its own country of that. But nonetheless, a series of strategic errors, because if this was intended in some way to send a signal to or to weaken NATO, it's had the complete opposite effect. We have 2 extra members. We have a stronger NATO. We had the NATO summit in Washington in September of last year, and the unanimous view was that NATO is stronger now than it's been for a number of years, and as important now as it was when it was first founded many decades ago. So strategically, Russia's made some big mistakes in this war. As to what happens next, there's a lot of discussion as to whether or not there may or may not be negotiations. And none of us quite know the answer to that question. But what I think is really important is that we double down and remain steadfast in our support for Ukraine. Because whether there's negotiations or not, it is extremely important that Ukraine is put in the strongest possible position. And to be put in the strongest possible position, that means we, allies, have to stay united in our support for Ukraine, notwithstanding that it's been going on for some time now. United and giving more by way of support, whether that's more capability, whether that's doubling down on the funding that has been provided, and at the same time more effective and stringent sanctions on Russia, which is having an effect on their economy, and ensuring that we put in some of the backup with training, etc., which, along with our allied countries, we've been providing in relation to Ukraine. So we have to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position, whether or not there are negotiations. And if we get to the point of negotiations, it is really important that this is done with Ukraine, with an outcome that Ukraine supports. And so that's where we have to start our analysis of any negotiations. But there's a long way to go. There's a lot of discussions going on. There will be discussions in the next 24 hours here in Tallinn. Welcome discussions, as various leaders are here for the JEF meeting. But it is very important that we double down, we don't back down on support for Ukraine, because it matters not just to Ukrainian sovereignty, it matters to the whole of Europe, it matters to our values. And I often pose the question back in the United Kingdom when we have a discussion about this. Just imagine what the situation would be if Russia succeeded in this, and how that would impact not just our freedoms and our values, but our prosperity. So from a European point of view, it is really important that we see this not just as a Ukrainian sovereignty issue, which it certainly is, but as a much wider conflict where we cannot allow Russia to gain from the aggression that we've seen during the course of this conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And to follow up, what specifically could we collectively do to support Ukraine so it would be in a strong position? Is there anything we haven't done so far that we could do more of, or what is there left to do?
Well, I think there are a number of things. There is an ever-increasing demand for more capability. That is understandable. And Ukraine needs all the capability that it can get. So I think all of us are putting more capability into Ukraine by way of equipment and other support. A lot of money has been raised, funding has been raised, but more is going to be needed. We don't know what's going to happen in 2025, but more funding is absolutely needed. I think we have to double down on the sanctions, the even more effective sanctions, because those sanctions are hurting the Russian economy, but we've got to make sure they hurt the Russian economy even more. So I think there's more collective work that we can do there. And the training is really important, the training of Ukrainian troops, which has been going on for some time now. I've been to see it for myself. I think some of my colleagues have. It's really good training. It's desperately needed. So I think on all of those fronts, we need to double down. But we need to be very public about this as well, because there's a tendency when people think there may be negotiations to just assume that's the next thing to happen, and we don't need to concern ourselves with what's going to happen between now and the opening of any negotiations. I think that's a big strategic error, and therefore I do think it's important that we speak with one voice, supporting Ukraine, doubling down, and demonstrating that with our actions. And we'll obviously be discussing this tomorrow morning at the session, leader session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the UK. You've been a stalwart supporter of Ukraine, and I think have been the beacon in European theatre as well in support to Ukraine. But Prime Minister Sture, what is your assessment of the security situation in Europe, and how can we make ourselves more secure?
Well, first of all, I agree with the outline that Prime Minister Starmer is making here. Of course, for any generation, having this open, biggest war in Europe since World War II is dramatic. We cannot spend one day without reminding ourselves that this is just extraordinary, and the human cost, and it's going to be with us for so many generations. But let us also, when we look at it from this angle, say that NATO is stronger. The alliance, the security of the 31 members is more solid. There has been a unique solidarity. We've had Estonia coming in as an ally. It means that we are in this alliance together with the mutual security guarantees that provides. We have forward presence. There are British troops in Estonia, Norwegian troops with others in Lithuania. We have new regional plans for NATO. So it's been, I think, a much stronger alliance as I've seen during my 20 years in politics now. And that is good. So there is a net contribution to our security, which is there. And I think NATO still holds this position that, we have to maintain that position, that even considering inflicting damage on any member will unleash the total alliance. Then the second part is that we have to understand the ongoing threats. We come back to Ukraine, because there I agree with what Prime Minister Starmer said. Keep our support. We are also scaling up. We will be providing support of €3 billion next year. And it's correct, the Nordic and the Baltics are the lead donors after the United States, and we have to be there in quality and in quantity. But then I also think there are some other areas we have to watch. One is the hybrid threat, which is kind of this borderline threat. When is a country attacked? It's not necessarily when the tanks is rolling over your border and it's deliberately something happening. But when are you in a situation where you're saying that you are now really, your sovereignty is being threatened? We need to work together on that, on assessment of hybrid threats, on attribution of hybrid threats, be they attack of subsea infrastructure, be they in terms of, hitting information systems in hospitals or public services around. We have to work more on that. And I mean, here, Estonia, I think is a very important country with your skills in these information technology areas, which we have to work on. Another example which we are dealing with now is the shadow fleet. These ships transporting Russian energy without any signs, without any insurance. This is bad for many reasons. One is that it is really going around the sanctions, which I think Europe has to understand that Russian energy is now on the increase again in Europe. Secondly, it's dangerous because these ships are old and they are not solid and they are not insured. So this is something we cannot simply watch, and now we are trying to come together. We will discuss it here at Jeff, but we do it in other contexts as well. So my point here is that Ukraine is a catastrophe for the Ukrainian people. It is rocking stability and security in Europe. And we have to, be vigilant on this. We are waiting for a new American administration coming in. But it does not mean that we in Europe should just sit and wait. I think we also have to reflect on how we position ourselves, how we coordinate better. Because this is my last point. After 1,000 days, many had predicted that there would be a lot of divisions. And I mean, among democracies and inside democracies, there are discussions. But I think what is remarkable is how united we have been. And that is something we really have to stick to, but we have to take that unity and make it concrete, because now we meet, I think this is the third time I meet with my Nordic colleagues in 2 months, and we should see to it that the agendas we fix for each meeting builds on the previous meeting, so we are getting concrete on how we improve on the shadow fleet, how we improve on coordination of our aid to Ukraine. I mean, the Ukrainians are asking for more air defense. There is more air defense potentially available, and we just have to, get our acts together so that that happens. So more concrete coordination among Europeans. And then my final point is that at some stage we have to start reflect on what will the future security architecture of Europe look like. Once this war, if it comes to a hold, a stop, a ceasefire or whatever, reflections on what that will be, with NATO from a position of stability and force. I think we also need a reflection on that.
That's the big question ahead. But if I may just ask you, you mentioned hybrid threats, and I think everybody in this room knows very well the hybrid threats that we've faced here in the Baltic Sea, but how is the situation in the high north, and in particular around Svalbard with Norway and Russia and Russia's?
Well, Svalbard is the northernmost part of Norway. It's somewhere between mainland Norway and the North Pole. The archipelago, it's a big geographic area, which we follow very closely. It's a very special place. It's a place with multiple populations living from many different countries, and there is a Russian settlement there, which is part of history. That is nothing to be discussed. But Svalbard is a place that has no permanent military forces placed on Svalbard, but it's a part of Norway. It's part of our security. So I can assure you we follow that very closely. And I have no alarmistic message to give on that now. Of course, we, again, observe it very closely, from an intelligence perspective and from what is going on on the islands. But right now, I think, Svalbard is an area which is not an issue for immediate concern. But if you look at the Arctic as a whole, it needs to be followed closely. There is greater Chinese interest in the Arctic. There is, we live next to Russia's largest nuclear arsenal, only 100 kilometers away, which is their nuclear potential for global outreach and for European outreach. So it's important for Norway, it has been for the last 15, 20 years, to bring our allies and colleagues along with knowledge of this region, because it is the high north. And if you have a focus in continental Europe or in the Baltic Europe, this is far away. So, even reflecting around a map what this looks like and what are the challenges and opportunities here, that's something Norway sees as its prime responsibility. But right now, I think, we have a pretty clear vision of stability in that region.
That sounds rather positive. Thank you. Prime Minister Michal, how do you see the security situation in Europe being a frontline state here in the Baltics?
It's probably almost the same as Kira and Jonas stated, because we are allies and friends in that matter. Probably very close also with the coordination, the view. I would say the first thing coming from Kiev, I was last week there 2 days, and I would say that the question how the situation in Ukraine is resolved probably would determine for many years, how Europe's value-based, rule-based world will be seen outside. Because if you give in and let's say, and we give up on Ukraine, then probably everybody, Russia and the club among, let's say, North Korea, Iran, everybody will have the message that you can change borders by force, you can take whatever you want, and Europeans will have the negotiations between themselves, and afterwards will be asking the bully what has happened. So I would say that right now the Ukraine needs a message of strong support, as already stated, that we are not giving up, but also we are increasing the support if possible, because right now, as we speak, Russia is deliberately bombing everything in Ukraine, everything doing with heat, with energy and so on, to give just one message that do not come back to Ukraine. There's nothing happening. There's no energy, no heat. This is a failed state, so on. And right now, to be honest, we have seen nothing that Putin has changed his goals. His message was quite clear years ago that Ukraine must not be part of Europe, must not be part of NATO, and so on. So this has not changed, and probably will not change if not met by force or strength. So I would say that Jeff's role, because as already Jonas pointed out, that we are probably among top contributors per GDP, money-wise, the fastest always. With Jeff and also with NATO and EU, we should give the push. Ukraine needs to be in this position of strength to change Russia's way and have Russia demanding the negotiations, not the other way around. So that probably will be the most important part, because Estonia has committed to 0.25% of GDP to Ukraine, and we are asking everybody to have the same level. In Kiev, I promise that we will keep it up and also ramp up our defense industry, also looking at what can we deliver as fast as possible. And also to my hope that if it's possible to deal with Shadow Fleet, this is like a money train running to Russia. They have more than half of the money coming from this kind of Shadow Fleet, and also this is an environmental disaster waiting to happen, because that's the only question then when and how some kind of this Shadow Fleet tankers break up, and we will have the only question that will this oil be spilled on Estonian shore or Finnish shore. So it's a big question also. And if possible, we should also increase our defense expenditure, because I would say that the old saying that if you want peace, you should prepare for everything. I'm not mentioning war, but you should prepare. That is still holds. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Estonia has done an exemplary job in increasing defense spending, but at the same time, we've seen quite a few hybrid attacks happen here in Estonia. Last October, we saw cables and pipelines being cut. This year, we've seen buoys, or those markers on Narva River, being stolen. We've seen GPS jamming. The attacks keep increasing. So how should we respond to them? How can we deter hybrid attacks as well?
Probably the best way is to be very public about it, who's doing what and when and where. And also with the hybrid attacks, there comes a second, like a must too, that you must be able to repair everything as soon as possible. That is also important for economy, security and resilience. But attribution, accountability probably are the answers, because with the hybrid attacks in Estonia, we have attributed to Russia, the attacks made by Russia, ordered by Russia. In Estonia, let's say, for example, editors in one journalist or one portal were attacked, the car was broken, the Minister of Interior's car, windows were bashed in, so on. So all these things are usually attributed, and people doing it are caught. So this is also a strong message to these kind of people that don't do it, you will be caught, you will be accountable for that. So attribution and accountability probably are the answers.
I think this underlines Jonas's point really about aggression and challenge not just being the concept of tanks going over borders, but taking many different forms. And so far as these assets are concerned, it is a huge threat and challenge, of course it is. And we need to be absolutely alive to it, wherever it's coming from, and working together to protect our assets and communications and supplies. And that has to be an important part of our overall preparation and part of peace. But recognising that conflict is taking, as it always does, a number of different forms, all more complicated, but with huge threats attached to it, I think is part of the understanding we have to have amongst ourselves. Part of our discussion has to be, as it has been and will be, no doubt, tomorrow, are we collectively fully alive to the risks and threats, and do we have a viable plan to protect? And then, of course, the public messaging that has to come out of it and attribution. But we shouldn't. It is a mistake, particularly with Russia, but with others, to think that all of the conflict is the traditional, tanks and armory conflict. It most certainly isn't anymore.
Definitely, and since we are here for the CHEF meeting, actually, my next question was going to be, do you think CHEF has a special role in dealing with hybrid threats? Because last year we saw CHEF sending ships to the area where the pipeline was struck and so on, but what could CHEF do in a case of hybrid scenario? Prime Minister Starmer, you can all answer, but I'm going to look at you first.
I mean, look, I think CHEF is really, really important because it's almost a little spearhead, an important part of what NATO more generally is doing. It has an agility and an ability to work together. That's been demonstrated in what we've done in recent years, and that's why I think all of us put great emphasis on the importance of CHEF. It's why tomorrow will be such an important meeting. It's an opportunity to come together, to work together, to see our service personnel training together, thinking through tactics together, and having real achievements because it's quite agile. And so I think it's a very important complement to some of the other work that is going on.
Yeah, I think it's been a big question now that Finland and Sweden have joined NATO is what is the role of CHEF, or what makes CHEF special to NATO? What is its added value to it? But I think if you want to add anything, Prime Minister of Norway.
Yeah, I think, it was created in 2014, and now we are 2025. And the fact that it is a light structure, it's really up to us how we use it. I think it is now taking shape as something very useful when you look at the new updated regional plans of NATO. New command structure or a lifted command structure, which is, up to deliver on those regional plans. And our national plans are going to fit with the regional plans. So it's a much, as I said, stronger alliance. And what we should not see, in my view, is that there will be separate regional identities in NATO, which means that we will only care about near us and forget about what happens around Turkey and Spain and Mediterranean, just as we don't want them to forget about what happens with us. That being said, obviously, we who are close here, we have a greater mutual interest, so that when something happens like this infrastructure issue, it is after the Nord Stream incident, Norway has 90 installations out in the North Sea, 9,000 kilometers of gas pipelines. And what happened in the weeks after that incident, our allies in the JEF structure and beyond, also Germany and France, they started to sail in the North Sea. They were visible. They were showing that we are here, we are following. And this, I believe, is something which is important in terms of knowing that you are not alone if you are exposed. Showing the flag is one thing. And then if you go one structure below that, our ministers of defense are cooperating more, our intelligence is cooperating more, and we can define ways of working inside this light structure, because this is not going to be an alternative command structure, an alternative regional structure. But what I would like to see, and I hope that JEF can be perhaps even more concrete in saying, from now to the next meeting, let's work on this agenda systematically based on the common threats that we face, such as hybrid threats, such as the Shadow Fleet, or such as other experiences linked to subsea infrastructure, for example. So I think Jeff is that kind of body. It's a very ambitious title, Joint Expeditionary Force. But it has, you know, among our defense forces, training.
Yep.
They have tabletop training. And it should be a needs-driven structure, that we do it according to the needs we have.
Yeah. So what do we hope to achieve tomorrow?
Oh, many things. World peace is among them, but that is the first one. But Shadow Fleet already mentioned. That probably is on topics everybody understands, and probably is high on Russia's pain list also, that if the Shadow Fleet is I wouldn't use the word harass, but more controlled by us, then probably it will send a strong message to Russia, because Russia's ability to wage war in Ukraine depends pretty much on getting free cash, or cash all over the world. It comes from energy trade still, which is not a good news. So starting from asking different documentations and so on, up to insurance, and if not, then also prohibiting using ports and so on, that is possible under this kind of regulations we have. So that probably is the first thing. Second topic is how in the future probably to deal with hybrid threats. Already mentioned that probably will be also topic of the next Jeff meeting, that how to work with hybrid threats. There's two sides of this coin. One thing is the limits, how to respond to them, and also how to work together to repair everything, all the damage done. So it's these are probably two topics in the future. And also there will be a topic that's already lingering in the air all over the news, that we should increase our defense expenditure in the future. That probably is the biggest question. That Estonia 2022 we had 2.16% of our GDP. Right now we have 3.4, years to come 3.6, maybe even up to 4. And right now we are the second probably per GDP in NATO. And that's not because it's convenient, but that's why we know our neighbor. We know that Russia is an existential threat to every democracy around here. There's no other choice. Russia is not deterring right now away until it meets some kind of force and understands that everybody is prepared, not afraid, but prepared. That is the message we want to have. So these probably will be the topics, and already as Kier and Jonas mentioned, that probably it will revolve pretty much around how can we put Ukraine into position of strength to influence Russia.
All right. But the question of increasing defense spending, all the Jeff countries spend more than 2%. But Secretary General Rutte has been this week just been saying that we need increased defense spending if we want to be ready for increased threat coming from Russia. He has argued that we should have around 3% of defense spending, as we did in Cold War times. Do you think this is realistic in present-day European countries, where the debate has become a little bit warfare versus welfare, and the support seems to be falling a little bit? People are suffering economically. As an Estonian, life is not great. There are tax increases, which I can understand, but it's not easy. So how's life in the UK and in Norway?
Well, look, it's tough. You're right to bring this up, and we might as well have an open discussion about it. Public finances are not in a good place in the United Kingdom. We inherited a failed economy and failed public services. That's a first double whammy in the United Kingdom. In the past, governments have tended to inherit one or the other, but not both. And not many people in the United Kingdom are keen on their taxes going up again. And they're right about that. Nor are they very keen on having their public services cut. because they know that they're not where they should be, particularly, for example, our health service. So there's no point pretending that this isn't a real debate. But, and it's a very important but, the first duty of government is obviously national security, to keep our people safe. And that is why defence spending, NATO, working with our allies, Jeff, is so important to certainly my government and all three of our governments. It is the first duty. I set out just 2 weeks ago our plan for change, which was what we want to do in terms of living standards, our health service, the prospects of young people, making sure that our communities are safe from crime, and making sure that we get to clean energy by 2030. All really important changes that will make a massive difference to life in the United Kingdom for the better, but they have to be on a foundation of security. And national security, keeping our people safe, border security is right there, which is why we have said that we will set out the path to 2.5% of GDP being spent on defence. We have to make the argument, you're right about that, in terms of our security, safety. We have to make the link that Ukraine is not just about a war about another country's sovereignty. It's about something far more significant than that, so far as Europe and the United Kingdom is concerned. Public opinion on Ukraine in the United Kingdom is very strong, as it is, I think, in all of our countries. In our general election in July, I and all politicians went across the country campaigning. Wherever I went, support for Ukraine was strong. And I think the vast majority of the British public do understand that it's a very important issue. But it is increasingly difficult when it comes to the economic circumstances that we are in. That's why making the case on the significance of Ukraine, making the case must double down, linking it back to each of our countries. What does it mean for us if Russia succeeds? Is a really important question that we have to answer with our people, to make it clear why it is that we are so supportive of Ukraine, why it is that we must stand with our allies on this, why it is we must make sure that NATO is in the strongest position as well now. This is a different world to the world of 10, 20 years ago, and we have to recognise the world that we are living in. There's a positive case as well to be made. I mean, defence spending doesn't sort of sit in a silo over here with no effect on the rest of the economy, no effect on technology. It has a huge effect on technology. It's the cutting edge of technology and change, which can then be used in other areas. It binds countries together. I think all of us have got joint projects on in terms of defence capabilities that bind us together. There's a huge number of well-paid jobs that are very important to our economy in defence spending as well. But we have to make that positive case. I don't personally feel that we can sort of sit back and assume that all of those in our respective countries necessarily accept all of our arguments unless we make them in that positive way, which I do think the argument can and should and must be made. But the challenge that you put to us is the right challenge, which is it's very difficult when finances are tight, as they are in all of our countries. And people have just been through a real cost of living crisis, where if there's one thing that came up in our election over and over again in July, it was people saying, I feel worse off. They're feeling across the country, I feel worse off. In my household, we don't have the money we did have. And I worry about my bills. And I can't do what I want to do with my family. We don't go on holiday quite the way we would have liked. We've cut down on going out for meals. The little things in life that make the difference between surviving and thriving, if you like. And that is keenly felt. And we need to understand that human emotion, because it's for real. It's what people have lived through. We've got to turn it around. And at the same time, we have to not just keep our spending commitments when it comes to defence, but actually increase them because of the volatility that's out there. But it is a very live debate, I think, in each of our countries.
Yeah, let's reflect a bit on it. You know, think about it, 2014, that 2% target was defined. And then under the Trump presidency, that was a big issue, you know, are the Europeans paying enough? When he comes back now, there are about 25 countries that have passed 2%. So it's quite substantially different. And that, I mean, he may say that he contributed to that. It happened under the other administration, but it happened because it was necessary for the countries to make that investment. And I think, you know, sometimes these percentage targets play a role. Sometimes they can confuse things because they don't say anything about quality. They don't say anything about combined effect of that in an alliance. So, I mean, if we really succeed now with regional plans, if we succeed with developing countermeasures for hybrid threats, if we succeed in learning together some of the very daunting lessons from the battlefield in Ukraine, there is new technology, new lessons learned. You know, how can we integrate that in our own defense? That is quality improvement, not necessarily measured by percentage. For Norway's part, you know, we have defined it in Parliament. My government put a proposal on a 12-year plan, basically to revamp our whole defense. And we have all parties in Parliament behind that now. It has never happened before, all parties. And it's almost going to double our defense spending. So we are now above 2 and we will move towards 3. But you know, to me, it simply tells me that really each of these sectors, building a new navy, completing our F-35 fleet, integrating it with other NATO countries, is now really about quality and interoperability that works. Because I think what the message we send when you look at this extraordinary Russian machine sacrificing life rolling in, we want to maintain that the kind of that deterrence coming out of that NATO alliance is so strong that that idea never will be contemplated. So I think, you know, let's discuss the level, but let us not be lost again with another figure that will, you know, put allies against each other. We have to be at an adequate, at the right level of investment, but I think we can do much more on coordination, on quality, and on relevance. Because, you know, in this plan we have put for 12 years, obviously technology is going to change immensely. So each year we have to come back to Parliament and update, is this the right plan? You know, is the investment plan we made in 2024 relevant in 26, 30, 32? Given the circumstances. And this is not something Norway can decide, should decide only on its own. Well, we should decide, but we should decide it in concert with our neighbors. Sweden and Finland, now NATO neighbors. We work closely with the UK on how we do maritime patrolling in the North Sea. And in JEF, we can also coordinate much better. So I would, you know, say quantity and quality. We should focus on both.
I think these are both really important points. If you look at the learning coming out of Ukraine already in terms of capability, that helps us understand where we need to make our investment, where we need to improve our investment, where technology and innovation is most clearly needed, and where the greatest benefit will come in real time. And as for the coordination, that too is very important. We've got, I think, 3 times as many British troops now with Norway training, doing the North Sea work as we've had in the recent past. So it's really ramped up. We've got our own troops here in Tapa, integrated, working on that forward front. And so, yes, it is about how much money is spent, of course. That percentage is very important, but it's how effectively it's spent and how we could coordinate better. And that's why JEF is really important, and the way that NATO allies work together to make sure that between us we've got the right capability and that we coordinate it in the most effective way. I do think there's something about JEF which is important, and that's the agility. It's not about a sort of regional substitute or an alternative to NATO, but it has got an agility. And I think almost the meeting tomorrow will reflect some of that, less of the sort of formality, more of an ability to move around the topics in a way that Jeff can. But this is part of the debate about where we go next with defence. It is, you know, this is what I say about the Russian conflict in Ukraine has had the impact, the opposite impact that they intended. It has certainly not weakened NATO. It has certainly not weakened the resolve of NATO members and allies to work together. It's had the complete opposite effect. And not just a drawing together, but actually the greater training, the greater coordination, the greater discussion of shared capabilities, I think is strategically the complete opposite of what Putin was intending to do. If he wanted to weaken NATO, he's gone about it in completely the wrong way.
Absolutely, I would add that security and prosperity usually go well together, and with this kind of politics that Putin is doing, he has brought new members to NATO, he has increased defense spending, he has increased defense capabilities, and everybody is staying quite resolute on the positions. That is very, very strongly visible. And the second thing, which is evolving and should be also evolving in CEF countries, NATO countries, EU countries, probably is the capability of production, also defense industry, because to be honest, maybe it's only in Estonia, but I would say that view of traditional defense capabilities wasn't seeing the defense industry as part of the capabilities. But right now it's changing with Ukraine, because at the moment you need something and fast, things are getting much warmer or heated already. You need different kind of productions at the site. So I would say that also like a joint understanding what are our capabilities, and also defense industry booming and ramping up, that probably will also be future, let's say 5 to 10 years, because I would say in Estonia, the most optimistic guys in Estonia, nobody is too optimistic, but the most optimistic guys usually are from defense industry right now. So they are ramping up and doing everything they can for Ukraine.
That's true. It's been a tough discussion at how can Russia produce so much more ammunition and weaponry than we in the West can. So part of the defense mindset that Secretary General Rutte speaks about is often about wrapping up our production capability, or turbocharging, if I remember his term correctly, our production capabilities. And I think here it's very important that the non-EU countries like UK and Norway are also included in whatever we do in the EU.
Well, let me say, we from Norway will support any EU effort to stimulate and initiate better industrial production. And Norway has actually been contributing to these new ASAP mechanisms inside Europe. And it happens to be that Norway has few of the companies that really are leading in certain sectors. You know, on air defense, NASAMS, Nammo, Norwegian Finnish, producing artillery and also a number of ammunition important, and in some other sectors. And these companies have been, you know, part of the bidding process and have had good results. So this we have to bring together, obviously. And I mean, 2 years have passed, and I'm fairly looking forward to the result of this these quite dedicated efforts to ramp up production, new production lines. But what we learn is that increasing production of some of these complicated military assets is much harder than ramping up car industry or any other sector. For example, you know, for the air defense system, the NASAM systems, they may have between 100 and 150 subcontractors in terms of parts. And you need to secure that value chain to produce one unit. And if things are regular, you just go on. But when things become extraordinary, you have to do extraordinary things. And of course, what the Russians are now doing is reproducing quite a lot of old stuff, which is going on. And we have to also there to be advanced on quality. and we can be, and we should be more kind of united and coordinated in Europe.
I think it's a quality versus quantity debate with Russia as well. I guess they care less about quality and whether they hit that specific target or whether they just hit something in Ukraine. But when we look at the broader picture, now that North Korea has sent troops to Ukraine, how does that change our calculus?
Well, if I may say, when I spoke with the new president-elect, President Trump, my message was, twofold, that Putin, you have something Putin does not have. And he said, well, what is that? And he said, well, you have friends. And real friends. I mean, friends who are there really because they want to maximize friendship. The other thing is that this conflict is no longer sometimes seen from the US as another kind of European civil war. This is a global conflict. You have North Korea, you have Iran, and the outcome of this conflict is going to have repercussions far beyond Europe, also on the calculus in Asia, I believe. So, and the third part is, of course, that when that new administration comes in on the 20th of January, a week or two after, they will own this conflict. It will be on their table. It will be their decisions that will matter together with ours. So I think, that is a serious matter about Ukraine, which brings me to another element, which is where I have some argument with some of my European colleagues. We have to be consistent because there are other conflicts in the world. And we want to address the global south about what is going on in Ukraine. And there we are really on a diplomatic fight with Russia about narratives, what's really happening. But there are pretty many down there who say you have double standards. You don't have the same view to what is happening in parts of the world in terms of brutal wars going on, Middle East, Gaza, and so on. And you have very strong positions on what is going on there. This has to link. And there I believe, we are not doing, or Europe is not doing a good enough job.
I think the North Korean troops is a very significant development. On a narrow front, it, I think, underscores the desperation of the Russians. And never forget the number of human beings they're losing on the front. It's colossal death toll on the Russian side that would make anybody shudder when you just look at the sheer number of bodies that are effectively being thrown at this conflict on the Russian side without any regard at all to the cost to their own people. Now North Koreans added to that mix. So that's the narrow point in terms of the conflict in Ukraine itself. The wider point is, as Jonas has touched on, that it extends the conflict and it begins to show the join-up between different points of tension around the world, parts of the Pacific, parts of the Middle East, and you can see the overlap and similarities that I think join some of these conflicts up, not in the sense that they're all linked, but you can see the undercurrents here in each of the conflicts. And it does, therefore, call into question what's happening in the Pacific and security there, but also the overlap with the Middle East, which, of course, we've been discussing now for over an hour, the Ukraine situation. But we have, at the same time, a desperate situation in the Middle East as well in relation to conflict, and obviously a ceasefire in Lebanon now, at long last, and further work being done to try and get that ceasefire in Gaza that's desperately needed to create the space for the remaining hostages to come out. They've been held for a very, very long time now, and every time I talk to any of their families, I can only describe what they're going through as absolute torture. You've got tens of thousands of Palestinians who've been killed in Palestine. We've got a desperate need for humanitarian aid to go in at speed and at volume. And in the end, there has to be the space created for a two-state solution, which to my mind is the only way that we resolve that conflict on a more permanent basis. But the overlap now between these conflicts is greater than might at first appear. So it is a very significant development, and we shouldn't just shrug our shoulders. We should see this in a very clear-eyed way.
Yeah, I would just add that I absolutely agree that to us, these usually, I don't know how to call them, but usual suspects usually are working together. Russia, Iran, North Korea. These are regimes not elected. They are driven to have this kind of conflicts going on to stay in power. So for Putin, it's quite clear, to be honest. A few years back, he had people on the streets not depending on oligarchy, not depending on the state so much.
Yeah.
They asked maybe there should be some kind of something resembling the elections. But right now, nobody's asking. If you would ask in Russia something right now, you would send to the front, or your family would be sent to the front. So I would say that these kind of regimes keep themselves in power until met with resolute force or strength. So yes, absolutely, this kind of involving North Korea, using Iran's drones and so on, that is a message of desperation, but also escalation, trying to have this escalate, trying to have this kind of blocks against other blocks. So I would say, coming back to this from where we started from, that the resolution of how Ukraine's aggression will be ending, if Ukraine is put in the position of strength against Russia, Russia is forced to negotiate, that probably would be the only way to deal with this kind of issues.
But what would be the ideal situation in Ukraine, if I may ask? What would be the positive solution from where we are now?
Well, I mean, this is a question everybody concerned with this issue is thinking about. I think my answer would be, and I'm thinking about it, it is deeply troubling what's happening. But I think the answer has to be pretty square and formal. No resolution for Ukraine without Ukraine. They have to be in the driving position. They are the ones attacked, and that has to be very clear. Not over their heads, not in the side room. Point one. Point two, I think, the principled view from the outside in public has to be withdraw. Get out of the territory that you have occupied. It cannot be accepted.
The entire territory, including Crimea?
Well, I mean, it has to be a principled view of this. And then, of course, for the leadership in Ukraine, they have a difficult calculus to make about, what is the price of ending the war. And I think, if in the case where they may seek advice or reflect on that, I think we as colleagues and partners should be available, but deeply respectful of that, principled position. Again, this, as we have said many times, this war could end tomorrow. It could end like that because the aggressor should pull back. Then we know it is far more complex than that, but it's very hard to sit from the outside and say, well, we think you should be, do this and that, when you are living in this drama.
The starting point is exactly right. The ideal outcome is what you asked. The ideal outcome is that the aggressor backs off. And we must never get to a position of thinking that there's any kind of equivalence here. And our job is simply to sort of mediate between two bad actors. That is not this situation. And sometimes the conversation sort of goes in that direction. We must absolutely start from a point of principle. This is an act of aggression by a Security Council member in flagrant breach of the United Nations Charter. Even to see Russia sitting in the Security Council with the Charter right in front of it, which it is breaching with this conflict on a daily basis and inflicting huge loss on Ukraine and its own people, has to be the starting position. From that starting position, the next step has to be this must be with Ukraine. We are not in a position across Europe to start developing our own plans, nor should we, of where we think negotiations should start or possibly finish. It has to be with Ukraine. And that is why it's so important that President Zelensky is coming to NATO meetings on a regular basis, is coming to the European political community meetings on a regular basis, so that we all have the opportunity to confidentially talk to him, as we do either when he comes or when we visit Kyiv, or by secure means, to have that conversation with him. He's in a very difficult position. His country's been invaded by an aggressor in very difficult circumstances, and the infliction on his people of loss has been huge. So we have to have those conversations. I think then thirdly, it's very important that as allies, we discuss and coordinate, because the one thing Putin would love is for all of us to take a different position and to be arguing for different outcomes, because that is a position of weakness amongst allies, and therefore all of those steps have to be in place as we negotiate through. We've got a change of administration in the US, which is why it's very important that we have been and continue to talk to Joe Biden as president, but equally talk to President-elect Trump, as we all have been doing, who's a major ally in this, and to make sure that amongst ourselves we have that coordination and cooperation and a proper sense between ourselves of what an outcome might look like, which is why I welcome the fact that we're able to discuss this tomorrow morning, leaders around a table in confidence, having the sort of frank and open discussion that you would expect of Jeff leaders on this difficult topic. But for me, the core principles are clear enough. It doesn't lead to a set outcome, because that has to be discussed, thought through, and each step carefully calibrated. But I think if we establish the principles, we've got the best chance of getting the best outcome here. In the meantime, back to what I said at the beginning, because it's so important, in the meantime, we absolutely must double down and make sure Ukraine is in the strongest position, because Putin wants the opposite. He wants Ukraine to be in the weakest possible position if ever negotiations start. And if we don't double down, we gift him that advantage, and we should never do that.
The ideal outcome probably would be that Ukraine wins and Russia loses. That's quite simple. But in different markers, that territorial integrity of Ukraine must be respected. Russia's all these heads, starting from Putin, should be held accountable. And also reparations should be paid. All this kind of damage done should be paid by Russia, not by our taxpayers, not by Ukraine, but by Russia. Because right now, if we estimate, let's say, Russia's frozen assets are about 250, 300 billions all around the world. That is already not enough to pay for the damage. Damage is estimated about 500 and plus billions. So just to pay for the damage already done, we need to taxate Russia, and that also will hamper them in the future and divert them off doing these kind of things again. So that probably is how it should be in ideal solution. But the second thing I would say, that already mentioned that Jeff is a good platform, as Kim mentioned, that yes, we should talk with one voice and very strong voice. Jeff is very strong voice in these kind of matters, because this is Jeff membership means that everybody is assisting more than everybody else. Ukraine is reacting faster and are much more agile in certain things than everybody else and other parts of the world. So we have the good possibility to influence the outcome, and we should.
Thank you. I know Prime Minister Starmer needs to leave a little bit early, so let's give him a round of applause and allow him to leave. And
Thank you very much. I'll see you later on.
Yeah. And after that, we'll open up the...
Thank you.
And we'll now open up the floor for questions. So please raise your hand if you have a question, introduce yourselves, and ask the question. We have 3 microphones around. So over there, I see Kristi Raik has a question. We'll take 3 questions at a time, so yeah.
Thank you, Kristi Raik, ICDS. Prime Ministers, you mentioned, of course, the need to further increase support to Ukraine. You were cautious, rightly, in talking about possible negotiations and to stress the need to involve Ukraine. One component that you did not talk about that I would like to ask about, which I think is an essential part of, first of all, getting to a ceasefire, but also getting to a solution where Ukraine remains sovereign and a democratic state. And that thing is security guarantees for Ukraine. So what is the solution there? What is your country willing to contribute? Unfortunately, the Prime Minister of the UK left, but the Norwegian and Estonian views on that, please.
We can answer for the UK. That's
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions on the floor? Over there.
Igor Bulan, Detector Media, journalist from Ukraine. Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. So actually, Jeff is an example of new type of alliances when we see when big alliances like the EU, NATO, they don't work in some cases. That's why maybe bilateral, trilateral, this kind of small, medium size of alliances work. And what can we expect for Ukraine? Maybe associate joining of such type of alliances, Jeff. Thank you.
Right. And we have a question here in the center.
Hakon Røder from Børsen in Denmark. I wonder, Prime Minister Støre, if you have a message tomorrow for your colleague from Denmark concerning the shadow fleet from Russia. Denmark is more or less controlling the passing of that shadow fleet, transporting about half of the Russian oil. They could stop it if they wanted to. They could demand more insurance. They could demand some valid insurance papers in courts instead of the insurance they have from Russia. And you talked about it earlier, so I wonder if you have a special message for her.
Thank you very much. We'll start with the special message. We'll go to the answers now.
Well, she's a very special woman, so I'll have a special message for her. Let me take the first question. You know, security guarantees, two dimensions to that. First, this came up 2 years ago. We discussed it in Vilnius. G7 countries discussed it. The Nordics made a common statement on security guarantees. Since then, each country has agreed with Ukraine a set of security guarantees. I mean, they are soft compared to NATO. This is not Article 5 language. But still, you know, we have linked our security guarantees, pretty comprehensive text, with our support program for Ukraine, which now stretches until 2030 guaranteed. So it will be you know, in total a large commitment there from our side. Then, of course, we enter into the kind of speculation. Should there be a negotiation? Should there be a ceasefire? What kind of security guarantees would it be on the other side of a line? And these are, of course, a very, I would say, sensitive issues. And the countries that are in a position to provide security guarantees of hardcore military effect are in a special position discussing that. And I will not add any more comment than saying that this is, of course, gradually being discussed. They are on a pathway to NATO membership. That has been confirmed by 2 NATO summits or 3 NATO summits. But on the way to getting there, having security guarantees that will not make any kind of settlements only an intermediary thing, I think is being taken seriously. Now on Ukraine and Jeff, I mean, Jeff was initially conceived to be countries in the north working together on issues linked to their specific situation in the Baltic. in the Straits of Skagerrak, and then North Sea. And I think that is the essence of JEF. So, you know, I don't think we have discussed integrating Ukraine into JEF, which would not be, you know, directly linked border-wise. But I think we will have Ukrainian presence tomorrow, so that is a way of working, you know, that we include them, and we did that when we have Nordic-Baltic meetings or Nordic meetings. We have also Ukraine visiting. Now on the shadow fleet here, you know, I know that my Danish colleague and I completely share the objective, as do my other colleagues in the JEF, in the Nordics and in the Baltics. And we are working on it. It's a complex matter. It is a complex matter because there is in principle free navigation, you know, out there. But there are certain issues that we need to address in order to limit, restrict, and deal with this phenomenon. So we have discussions going on in the Nordic-Baltic family. There are discussions going on in G7, in some other formats, IMO, International Maritime Organization. So we have to come at it from different angles. So it's linked to, you know, insurance, shifting of flags, and also, of course, access.
Thank you.
Yeah, the three questions. The first one, probably the best security guarantee would be obvious, NATO membership. Estonia has been very vocal and open about it, that Ukraine is part of Europe, should be member of NATO. If that's not possible or it takes time, probably security guarantees that work are European and stays together, not one without the other. So it probably is the state of play we are in, and we will be discussing that today and tomorrow. Second one, you mentioned in your question that weak EU and NATO. I would say that EU and NATO are not weak. They are quite strong, stronger than our opponents want. So it's I would say that JEF contributes to NATO, doesn't compete with it, as already mentioned, that we're not competing against each other. JEF is, yes, it's somewhat regional, yes, it's somewhat like-minded group and maybe a little bit faster, more agile, but it does not compete with other NATO members because already, as Jonas explained, that I would say that NATO is an alliance guaranteeing each other's security because just came from Mamari base. Dutch fighters are in the F-35, so these are not paid by Estonian taxpayers. We don't have the capability, but we can do something on the eastern front, eastern border. So everybody does what they can. And the last one, probably about the shadow fleet, I would say that yes, we are looking for different kind of means because Estonia has visited its public in Estonian Rahvusringhääling, it's national broadcasting, more than 250, has checked more than 250 ships already, insurance-wise and so on, boarded about 7. I'm just recollecting news I just read, that boarded 7. So if we would have, let's say, more consistency on that, check insurance, check documentation.
We're also putting ships on lists.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. But I would say, and I would argue, not being a hot-headed, nobody's hot-headed in Nordics, but I would say that I would argue that if you know that Russia has free cash or new cash, fresh cash coming in with this kind of shadow fleet, that is the point of pain. It's probably among the top point of pain. So yes, today and tomorrow we will be talking about shadow fleet, and to my recollection, we have some position already fixed on that. So we will, addressing public also with that.
Perfect. Hopefully we'll also hear some positive news out of the EU foreign ministers meeting today regarding the shadow fleet and sanctioning. We have a quick round for 2 more questions. One over there, and
Thank you. I'm Josh Pisano from Politico. Basically, the question is quite clear on defence spending. We're looking at a situation where NATO and member countries will be asked for 2.5% or 3% by the summit next year. Is your hope to both of you that tomorrow you can come out with a unified position in favour of at least 2.5%? And what do you both think should be the situation in The Hague?
I mean, my friend, I warned against this kind of decision making. I'm not coming in and saying, committing in the statement to a figure which is, you know, dead serious things you have to plan and commit in your budget planning. You know, when I came into government in 2021, Norway was among the countries that had not reached 2% and did not have a plan to reach 2%. So we made a major effort to put a new complete plan, which has lifted us well above 2%, and we are heading towards 3%. But I don't think, you know, that you know, quarterly meetings should kind of agree a new figure like that. That has to be a much more thorough process. And I come back to the point. You have to deliver on quality, on coordination, on integration and interoperability. That has to be done in line. Now, there are about 25 countries that have reached 2%. So let's look into the quality of that. Which just, you know, by extension, I'd like to mention one point. We are supporting Ukraine. But there again, we have to be better with our coordination, what we give, and the quality of what we give. If you ask the Ukrainians what they receive, one thing is what donors say they have given, another thing is the quality of what the Ukrainians say they have received. And not all that is something to be too proud of, because they are receiving stuff that they cannot necessarily use as they should have. So I would emphasize that. But I'm not going to, you know, having just made a major step on this, sign up to new commitments before we have really done a much more thorough evaluation of that.
Thank you. I think it proves the point that defense spending is a serious matter, and we can't fight wars with paper tigers or plans that don't have any means behind them. So thank you. And I want to thank the Prime Ministers for their wonderful debate. Let's give them a round of applause, and I will ask you to remain seated while the Prime Ministers exit.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jonas. Yeah.
Like that. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Good luck at dinner.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, everybody feel free to go.